Yes, I've got news about the European Parliament. And what I mean is my research on the news coverage of the European Parliament. In general, I ask, is the European Parliament at all a newsworthy institution? It plays a key role in the EU political system. It is the only directly elected institution. And it takes important decisions. It has comprehensive legislative rights and also veto rights, which got expanded even more with the Lisbon Treaty. And these decisions affect European citizens in their daily lives. On the other hand, geographically, it's rather removed from European citizens. It even meets in two cities, in Strasbourg and Brussels. And the legislative procedures themselves are quite complex and at times very lengthy. So for citizens who are less familiar with EU politics, it's often difficult to follow. And that is, the media steps in and can provide a linkage between Brussels politics and Strasbourg politics as well, and citizens in their home country. So that is why I ask how much attention do the media actually pay to the European Parliament and their members? And I ask specifically not during election times, but during non-election times. And I look at broadsheets in my research. I present a few results from several studies. And broadsheets are opinion leaders in Europe or in national contexts, and therefore provides a good reason to study them. So, first results about the European Parliament in general. Not only mentioned as an institution in the media, but also all kinds of references, including committees, members, and parties and decisions. So this graph shows the broadsheet coverage monthly total number of articles per month. In 18 broadsheets altogether. That was during the 6th parliamentary term, and I selected 3 broadsheets in 6 countries. And these countries are the UK, Ireland, France, the Netherlands, Germany, and Austria. And what's important about this figure is that we see that coverage is not random, it's quite irregular. And that is, we have increased coverage during the winter months, and less coverage during the summer months. That is when the European Parliament is in recess. So there's no legislative activity, and hence there are no reports. But at the same time, we also see that there's a lot of variation across country. So the German newspapers in this case paid the most attention to the European Parliament and its members, whereas British and Austrian newspapers paid least attention over these 2 years of investigation. So what explains variation? Over time, as I said initially, I also conducted case studies, for instance, into the investiture of the European Commission, which I followed over many years, and also the case study of the SWIFT agreement. And I show that when the European Parliament has got power to veto in the case, to say no to the European Commission, or the initial choice of Barroso in 2004, and the power to reject the SWIFT agreement in 2010, the media has paid a lot of attention to the European Parliament compared to beforehand. So that is on news values of surprise, power, and relevance. And on the other hand, we've just seen parliamentary calendar. The media follows the parliamentary calendar very closely. And I also find that national elections, other than one would expect, they do not compromise European Parliament coverage, but on the contrary, the coverage of the European Parliament is high in the run-up to national general elections and during elections. Across country, I find that public attitudes towards EU integration, support for EU membership, is one explanatory factor. suggesting that more pro-European citizens are also slightly more interested in the European Parliament to read about it, and to which journalists then respond. And the domestic parliamentary tradition has an effect on the amount of news. That is a negative effect. So the more people trust their national parliament, the lower the coverage from the European Parliament, which suggests a rivalry. But also the domestic parliamentary tradition is reflected in news content. So the way MEPs and their legislative roles and political roles are reported about, how party political conflict inside the European Parliament is reported, is reflected in news content. Having a brief look at individual MEPs, that's a different study with my colleague Sofia Vasilopoulou, where we looked actually in total at 302 MEPs of the 7 parliaments, and that's almost half of the legislature. They come from 5 countries this time: the UK, France, the Netherlands, Germany and Italy. These ones are the most visible on average. So there is, for instance, the British MEP Nick Griffin, who was at that time leader of the British National Party. He got a lot of attention because he was, for the first time, invited as a right-wing populist leader to the British BBC show Question Time. And Marine Le Pen, at that time, at the peak of her coverage in spring 2011, ran for the leadership of the Front National, which she also won. So that got her a lot of coverage. Whereas other MEPs, I won't go into detail, but it's also correlated with scandals, political scandals, which got them more attention. But in general, Sophia and I find that there are more MEPs who receive regular coverage, that is every other month at least. We also have monthly measures, compared to MEPs who receive no coverage at all, so which is quite a positive finding. But we also find that in order to make it into the news, it matters more who these MEPs are than what they actually do in the European Parliament. So who they are in terms of office, seniority, and especially office at the domestic level matters much more than parliamentary questions or reports for their news attention. And it's also, in another work, I also find that the own national MEPs are reported most often by the press. So there's hardly cross-references, with the exception of the French press. But this is not surprising, since MEPs are elected in the domestic context, and hence the media provide the linkage function there. As I said, domestic political office is a strong determiner of attention paid to MEPs. In a new study, I also find that electoral institutions matter. So those MEPs who, and that's a cross-country study in all 27 European countries in 2009, that is MEPs who are elected in electoral systems where candidates are favored, candidate-based system, such as under open ballot or in small member districts, receive much more attention than those who are elected in larger districts or under closed ballots. Then concluding, MEPs are, and the European Parliament and its members, they are newsworthy. There's frequent coverage, and we also have common news value that apply. So surprise, as I said, and power and importance. But, and that's the special case with the European Parliament, the domestic political context shapes the news coverage of the supranational parliamentary actors. Thank you very much for your attention.